Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on the time zone. I am really happy to see so many of you joining today's Ambassador Circle session. My name is Idit Reitzis. I'm the Director of Outreach and Development at the Daniel Centers. I'm based in the United States, at the moment in Israel. And I just notifying everyone that we're recording the session today and asking again for everybody to mute their microphones. And you can start putting questions in the chat, and we'll get to them a little bit later after the discussion between Rabbi Meir Azari and Professor Gordis. And for many of you who were on the call last time, we were experiencing daily attacks from Iran. Luckily, when we had our last guest speaker, Professor Manuel Trachtenberg, he did not have to take shelter. Let's assume that today's session will be uneventful. Um, so thank you for joining us. I'd love to say a few words about the Daniel Centers because we have many newcomers today. The Daniel Centers was established in 1991 in Tel Aviv. We're a vibrant network of Reform Jewish communities in the Tel Aviv-Jaffa area. We offer a welcoming, inclusive, and egalitarian approach to Jewish life in Israel. I think it's safe to say we've become the leading voice for pluralistic Judaism, especially for Israelis who are seeking a spiritual connection outside of the Orthodox frameworks, where we are a place where tradition meets modern values. Our five centers offer everything all inclusive, Jewish life cycle events, Shabbat and holiday services. And we also are very proud that we are in Jewish public schools offering inclusive and tolerant curriculum that embodies inclusivity and tolerance. And we run the largest non-Orthodox conversion program and school in Israel. Rabbi Meir Azari is our founder and is the head of the Daniel Centers since our inception in 1991. And he actually is one of the first Israeli rabbis ordained at the HUC in Jerusalem. He was the former director of the Israel Movement for Progressive Judaism and is a longtime board member of the Jewish Agency for Israel. Actually, the connection that we have with Professor Gordis is from one of our good friends and board members, Ira Wagner, who should be on the call. And Professor Gordis had hosted Meir recently on his podcast a couple of months ago. Meir has a new book that has come out called Lighting the Way on Jewish leadership, and it explores the moral and spiritual responsibilities of Jewish leaders in modern Israel. It it urges Israeli society to reclaim Judaism that is ethically at its core based on compassion, justice, and coexistence. I am pleased to now hand this over to our Mark Blattner, who is the Federation head for Portland. Mayor was recently in Portland and got to see the Jewish community there. And I'm going to hand it over to Mark to introduce
Great.
and start the session.
Thank you, Edith. Appreciate it very much. Very honored to be able to join you all and do this today. As she mentioned, Rabbi Azari was recently in Portland. It was my first time meeting with him, but really got a much better understanding of the Daniel Centers and its impact on creating inclusive and egalitarian approaches to Jewish life. Very similar to what we tried to do here in Portland, a community of about 55,000 Jews. Our goal is to embrace the idea of openness to Jewish pluralism and investing in people's individual Jewish journeys. And now I get the opportunity to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Daniel Gordis, who has quite an extensive resume and certainly is a very impressive person, as you all know. He's the Senior Vice President and the Koret Distinguished Fellow at the Shalom College in Jerusalem, which he helped co-found. It's the only liberal arts college in Israel. He was the founding dean of the Zingler School of Rabbinic Studies at the University of Judaism, the first rabbinical college on the west coast of the United States. Since moving to Israel in 1998, Dr. Gordis has written and lectured throughout the world on Israeli society and challenges facing the Jewish state. He's been published in the New York Times, the New Republic, Commentary, etc. He's also the author of 12 books, 2 of which have won the National Jewish Book Award. His writings reflect on Zionism and contemporary Israel, exploring the souls of the people who are the Jewish state. And as I shared with him before the call, my favorite is his biography on Menachem Begin. His recent History of Israel, Israel, A Concise History of a Nation Reborn, has been translated into 6 languages. And his latest book, We Stand Divided, The Rift Between American Jews and Israel, it's an excellent read as well. For him, Israel is much more than a conflict. His successful podcast and email, which I wake up to every morning, Israel from the Inside, where Rabbi Yazeri was recently a guest, is meant to understand the soul and, as events unfold, the background we need to know and appreciate what is really happening, why, and what it might mean for Israel's future. And for those of you who listen or read, you can certainly feel the struggle and the pain going on in Israel today. And like the Daniel Centers, Dr. Gordis sees Israel and her people as one filled with vast potential, and especially now as this moment in time, as a country rebuilding itself into its best possible future. And with that, I would like to hand things over to Rabbi Azari to begin the conversation.
Mark, thank you very much. And I no doubt accept your invitation and my friend's invitation to visit again your beautiful city, Portland. But next time, not in 6 or 7 minus, which is, I don't know how much in Fahrenheit. I mean, that was so cold. I hope that next time it will be a little bit better. Thank you for joining us, Mark. And Daniel, hi, nice to have you now in our territory, Ambassador Circle. It was so nice being your guest in your podcast. And I'm so happy that you agreed to come and visit us in our living room, Ambassador Circle. Daniel, you are here. I can't see you.
Yeah, you should be able to see me.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Good. You're here. Daniel, let's start by saying to our audience, part of them saw and heard just a few weeks ago, our friend Professor Emmanuel Trachtenberg talking about politics, about the Middle East, about the economy, about the challenge, security, and the whole stuff that is bothering us. But let's go for a different direction. And I will start by asking you, Daniel, about your feeling, about what we say in Hebrew, matzav ruach. I don't think that talking about the mood is the same as matzav ruach in Hebrew. What is your matzav ruach right now? And what you as Daniel, your family, and your surrounding feel in this point in life? You know, we had such a time. I mean, the last 2 years, especially the last 3 or 4 weeks in Israel. So let's talk about matzav ruach.
Well, first of all, Rabbi Azari, thank you so much for the invitation to be in your living room this time. It's really an honor and a pleasure.
It's really my living room.
And, as was said already by Edith, the work that you and the Daniel Center are doing in Israel and Tel Aviv and beyond is really critically important. And I'm just very honored to be with you and again to have this conversation. Matzav ruach. Well, it's a very hard question, as you know, because I think we are all experiencing a multiplicity of things at the same time. I think we feel many different things, many different conflicting emotions, and I'll just try to lay them out very quickly, and then we can explore whichever you'd like to pursue or go on to something else, your choice. Bottom line, I'm very bullish on this place, largely because it's too important to fail. They say about companies sometimes that they're too big to fail. We're not too big to fail. We're too important to fail. The future of the Jewish people, as we can imagine it at least, is going to be written in the state of Israel. That's just the reality. Even before this war and before the outbreak of anti-Semitism in the United States, the numbers were already such that this is the largest single Jewish community in the world. And by 2048, more than half of the Jews in the world are going to live in Israel. And the birth rates just in both places suggest that over the course of time, an increasing percentage of Jews, more than half, and then eventually 2/3 are going to live here. And it's the only place in the world where Jews with all of the problematics involved determine our future. We made a horrible, horrible set of mistakes almost 2 years ago, and we're paying for it very dearly, but it is still the only place in the world where we determine our future. It's a place in the world where I think in some way, shape, manner, or form, Jewish identity is much more guaranteed than anywhere else as well. It's very interesting to see all these people that are not religious, but are, Israelis and Israeli soldiers go into Gaza and come out after months and months of fighting. And what they say is Am Yisrael Chai, right? It's not about, they didn't say, the Labour Party this or the Likud Party that. They say the Jewish people lives. There's a sense of peoplehood here that's very robust. We saw, I think, that the sense of Israeliness led to a sense of kind of rediscovered religious sentiment among some of the hostages, which we've read about and so forth. So Number one, I'm very bullish about this because I really believe that we have to be bullish about it. This is where the future of the Jewish people is going to be written. At least that's what I believe. Having said that, we've had a terrible few years, really. I mean, if you want to go back to January 23, when the judicial reform, or called the judicial overhaul or judicial coup, whatever you want to call it, was launched, we've had in this country almost 3 years of really horrific internal divide and external fighting. And this country is a very, very, very long way away from healing. My wife and I actually were at the Nova site earlier this afternoon. And so I'm very raw, I have to confess. It's a very painful place to be. I've been there a number of times, not a lot of times, but I've been there a number of times. And we were there and walking around and taking it in, and every few minutes, an enormous boom, and the ground shook. And you're reminded that you're only a couple of kilometers away from Gaza, and there's a raging war going on there. And you see soldiers walking all along Route 232, going to get meals and this and that. We're a country that's been in a war for much longer than Israel's army is equipped to be at war. And so there's a kind of, I think, exhaustion here. There's an exhaustion from the Iran thing, which went very well, unless you're one of those people who tragically lost their life or had their apartment blown to bits. And there was more than a little bit of that. But I think we're just exhausted. I think that people are kind of numb and sort of waiting to see what's Bibi going to do, what are the Haredim going to do. There was a whole explosion about that today in the Knesset. So number one, I'm very bullish. Number two, I think we're all very exhausted. And the last thing that I'll say is I really do think that things are going to turn around here. If I had to predict, things are going to get worse and then they're going to get better. They're going to get worse internally, not externally, I hope and pray. But they are going to get worse internally if there are elections or the Haredi draft issue. But the last thing that I'll say about this is that there is such a deep wellspring of commitment to this country, of caring about other people. What you see in the Knesset and all of those machinations is not really Israel. That's just the 120 people who have been elected by Israelis. It's true. They were fairly elected.
By coincidence, most of
Well,
them.
no, I mean, I think, by the way, that if we had elections tomorrow, a huge percentage of them would be reelected. So it's not entirely coincidence. I mean, they are who the voting populace wants here in large measure. Bibi has a very secure base. I'm not part of it. And not everybody who's in Bibi's base believes in things that I don't believe in. We just read the man differently. But I don't think that they represent the depth and the greatness of the Israeli people. That I think it's fair to say. The Israeli people is much greater, deeper, and embracing than its legitimately elected members in the Knesset. And I think at the end of the day, that is going to win out. So we may be in for a stormy year or two more, maybe even a little bit longer. But I think the war has unleashed tremendous potential here. And I have no doubt that even I don't, my children's generation will live to see it come to fruition.
Daniel, you work with young people. I mean, Shalem Institute draw a lot of young people. You know, when I visit you there, it was amazing to see so many young people in a vacation time, you know, study, talking. I mean, that was amazing. What do you get from them? You're tired. They're tired. What is the feeling among the young generation that you meet? And what is the implication to this generation that it's actually 2 years in war, and they see their friends dying. Many of them were hurt in the spirit, if not in the body. What is the young generation feeling, the one that you meet in your institution?
I think they are unbelievably determined and resilient and committed. At the beginning of the war, in October, November, December of 23, in other words, that academic year, our classes are basically 50-50 men, women. We had about 60% of our students called up. The Israeli average at universities and colleges was about 30%. We had 60% because we tend to attract the kind of a student who's been in the army longer, who are officers, who care deeply. But if we had 60% called up, obviously not all the men were called up, and 50% of the classes are women. We clearly also had women called up. We lost students. We've lost graduates. We've lost siblings of students. I mean, we have not gone unscathed. But they're tired in a different kind of a way. They're tired, I think, in a sense of they're physically exhausted. They go to battle, they come back, they take a shower. This is not an exaggeration. They go to battle, they come back, they take a shower, they put on jeans and a t-shirt instead of a uniform, and they show up on campus and go to class. How they focus on anything is really beyond me, I have to say. But they're there. They're there, and I think they actually now have a sense of what a luxury it is to be able to read books with smart people and talk about the great ideas that have shaped the Jewish people and have shaped the West. So what I get from them is a sense that sometimes if I feel exhausted, not physically, but just kind of depleted, when you talk about matzav ruach, just depleted, I look at them and I say to myself, you have no right to be depleted. These are the kids that do 250 days in Gaza, some of them more, some of them less. You just don't have the right to be depleted. This is the Jewish people has been in this story before. Yesterday was the 17th of Tammuz, which is what's considered one of the minor fast days of the Jewish year. It's a day that commemorates the breaching of the walls of Jerusalem thousands of years ago. But the liturgy is not only about that one incident. The liturgy for the fast day yesterday was about thing after suffering after suffering after suffering. And when you read it, I used to read it years ago and I'd say, oh my God, come on, look at Jerusalem. It's thriving and, traffic is jammed and cranes are building. And this is a little bit outdated. And I have to say, yesterday I felt that was a foolish sentiment all those years that I felt it. I felt that this is a Jewish story. This is just a Jewish story. We have great periods and we have terrible periods. I'm assuming it's always going to be that way. And we're in a hard period, but I think those young people remind us that they understand the cyclical nature of Jewish history. And the only reason we've bounced back from difficult periods is because people have believed in the cause of the Jewish people and have devoted their lives to making it happen. And that's why they're at Shalem, and that's why Shalem exists. So I get from them a sense of purpose, a sense of the possibility of a joie de vivre, the joy of living, even in the midst of all of this horror. They're getting married. I mean, literally, they're getting married. They're having babies. They are taking care of the wives of their friends who were killed. They are the very best of what the Jewish people represents. And so I get from them a tremendous sense of purpose and resilience.
Well, Daniel, let's stay for a second in the young generation world. Your book, We Stand Divided, in English, Krovim Rechokim in Hebrew.
Yeah.
What is the difference, that you see as an expert, about the division between the two communities, between the Israeli youth and the American Jewish youth? Just a little bit about the division. I mean,
Yeah.
what is in between those two communities that, our purpose is to build a bridge between those two communities. Can we build a bridge? Can they understand the other side? We can understand the American Jewish side. They can understand what is going on in the mind and the spirit of the Israeli kids that just returned yesterday or go tomorrow to Gaza or to Lebanon or to Syria. What is going on between the two communities? I'm not talking about leadership, politics. Maybe we'll talk about that later. I'm talking about the young generation, the spirit.
They are very, very different creatures. And that's not to say good or bad or better or worse or right or wrong, but they are very, very different creatures. I had breakfast early this morning with a friend of mine who is a rabbi in the greater tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, etc. A non-Orthodox rabbi, we'll just leave it that. And he comes to Israel a lot, and we just get together for one of those, typical Israeli breakfasts. And we were talking a little bit about the recent election in New York, and he's deeply upset about it. And I said to him, how are your congregants? He's a congregational rabbi. And I said, how are your congregants feeling about it? He goes, oh, they're beside themselves. They see that the Democratic Party is going in that direction. They're very worried about America as a home and so forth. And this gets to your question, Rabbi Azari. And I'm just quoting him. So don't shoot the messenger. I'm just quoting the guy that I spoke to 12 and a half hours ago. I said to him, what do their college age kids feel about the Mandani election? And here's exactly what he said. He said, look, they're not really Jews. And I was, what are you talking about? He did not mean that they're born of a non-Jewish mother. That was not his point at all. His point was that the primary lenses through which these young people look at the world and their own lives, Judaism is not the main one. And he was saying that fundamentally, when somebody like that gets elected, they're not freaked out because it's not their first order of priority. Now, that struck me as a little bit harsh, Now, I have to say, he's on the front lines in the United States running a very successful congregation, and I'm not. And he wasn't being recorded, so he wasn't saying it for anybody's digestion. He was just telling me what he thought. But I found it very sad. I found it very, very, very sad. And I thought about it all day today. And then when we got to the Nova site, um, and I'm not talking about the kids who were killed there, but the Israeli teenagers and young people who were there with a sense of hallowed ground. I was reminded being at the Nova site today of the time that when I was a little kid, I mean, probably 10, 11 years old, something like that, when my parents took us to Gettysburg. Those were back in the days when, as an elementary school kid, we had to learn the Gettysburg Address. It's not that long. Had to learn the address by heart. And I wasn't old enough to really understand the Civil War, not slavery, and I got that. But I mean, I wasn't sophisticated in any way. I was a little boy. But I had the sense that I was on hallowed ground. I had, even as a young kid, my parents took me there. You had a sense of kedusha. You had a sense of this is not ground like any other ground. And when my wife and I were there today, there were some people talking, not at all inappropriately, but they were talking amongst themselves. And my wife said to me, it should be asur, it should be forbidden to speak here. It should be silent here. Because she just wanted to take it in. But what I noticed was the number of young people who were there. Some of them probably soldiers, many of them not. But it's a young generation that, look, when people got called up to Gaza, they've done 200, 250, 300 days. I'll give you an example of the ways in which I think they're just, first of all, in the book, I wasn't talking about the war. The book came out long before the war. But what I pointed out in the book is that I think fundamentally Israeli Judaism is fundamentally a nationalist project in which people like you, Rabbi Azari, are trying to inject an element of religious and spiritual life into people that may not have it. But it's the nationalism that fuels the engine here. Whereas in America, I think the engine that is fueled is fundamentally, not only, but fundamentally a religious engine, meaning it's the shul, it's the synagogue.
So let's go from here for a second, Daniel, to the question that I've heard from a Reform rabbi that I've met, as you met, not breakfast today, but few days ago. The difference is said between our young generation is the question of how we look upon morale, how we look upon who we are from that perspective, what is right and what is wrong. Can you talk a little bit about that? The soldier that goes to Gaza and understand the world from a certain perspective, and the guy that sits in New York in the community of your rabbi or my rabbi, your friends or my friend. Why to hold a gun? Why to shoot? Why to do this or that? I mean, this gap is growing in this perspective.
But that, I think, is the nationalism issue. I don't agree that the issue is a moral divide. The vast majority of Israeli soldiers who go into Gaza take no pleasure at all in having to be at war and having to kill people. I mean, we hear terrible stories, and some of them are probably true, and some of them are not true. But the idea that the fundamental divide is about morality, I just disagree with. There's an implicit sense that we have a kind of a purist morality here in the United States, and over there, Israelis are sullied by the need to go to war, and so on and so forth. I just don't buy that in any way whatsoever. I think that the difference is people for whom being Jewish and being part of the Jewish people is more important than anything else, and people for whom it's not. And I think that's the fundamental difference. Everybody has a right to criticize Israel. You and I criticize Israeli leaders all the time, and we're very distraught about some of the things that are happening in the country, both on the political and religious level, and in other ways as well. But what I think we would say is that the lens through which we view the world is that what is most important to us as human beings is our being Jews. And then second to that is our being Israeli Jews, because we see the enterprise of building a Jewish state as the place that is most likely to guarantee the future of the Jewish people. I think that what separates young people, and I'll tell you a humorous thing in a minute, but I think what separates the young people is who understands that when the call comes, you go home, you get your uniform, and you go into battle, and you may die. I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them have been killed, and there's this book that maybe you've seen. You've probably seen it. Imatem korim et ze. If you're reading this, and it's the book of all of these letters that soldiers had in their pockets to their parents, their wives, their whoever. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back, and here's what I want you to know. And they all say, I mean, almost all of them say, I want you to. Of course, you're going to be sad, but I don't want you to spend your life wallowing in grief. And I want you to know, so many of these letters say, I died doing what I wanted to do more than anything else, and that is protecting and defending the Jewish people. And I just think that that fundamental instinct is an instinct that it's very hard to pass on in a setting in which it's not the nationalist thrust that is at the core. Now, nationalism has many, many, many problematic dimensions to it, right? I mean, if you get nationalism unfettered, you end up with Ben Gvir. If you get nationalism unfettered, you end up with, people in Judea and Samaria and the West Bank attacking totally innocent Palestinians, and it's sickening. It's disgusting. Anything in the world unfettered, taken to its natural extreme, is problematic. Anything is problematic. So, but I don't want to judge the nationalism of Israel by looking at the bad apples. I want to look at the barrel of the apples, and fundamentally, what I think the barrel of apples here has produced is a very vibrant, deeply committed Jewish life. And I think, the humorous, quasi-humorous thing, I was talking to a woman who's got a very close friend who works for Birthright here in Israel. And Birthright, as you know, had 3,000 people here who were stuck because the war started, their Birthright trips were over, the airlines closed, and parents were going bananas, as you can only imagine. And in the end, Birthright got 3,000 kids out by boat. And it was a whole to-do. There's not a lot of boats hanging around, taking people to Cyprus, and they had to get Navy escorts, which they had to pay the Navy for, and it was a whole to-do. And I said to her, I can only imagine those American parents, the kinds of questions that they asked. And she burst out laughing, and she said, when they sent out the email telling parents, we've got them all on boats, they're leaving tomorrow, they're going to be in Cyprus at time X, Y, or Z, a lot of the emails came back asking, how is the Wi-Fi on the boat? And I thought, okay, our kids go into Gaza without their phones. They don't need Wi-Fi because they take their phones away from them. And again, it's a trivial thing, but your kid is being saved from a war that a lot of other kids are fighting in. While these kids are being escorted out by boat, other 18 and 19 and 20 and 20-year-old men and women are above the skies of Tehran. And so you ought to be at least a little humbled, it seems to me, when you know that other 22-year-olds are over the skies of Iran. Maybe you just write back and say, thank you for getting my kid out. And for however many hours it is on the boat to Cyprus, so maybe the Wi-Fi is not going to be that great. And again, I'm being a little bit harsh here, but I'm saying that I think to say that the issue is the moral divide really irks me, because there's an implicit sense that there's a purer kind of morality on American soil where you don't have to do all the dirty things of protecting yourself. And I would say that there's a deep moral core to knowing who you are and to being willing to protect and defend your people. And you develop it as a different kind of a person. And there's a reason that they put Israeli soldiers on birthright trips. Not only because they're handsome and pretty and all that kind of stuff, but because young Americans meet people who've done very, very, very different things at that age. So there are lots of things to say about how American Jews and Israeli Jews are different. And what I said, the nationalism versus the religious piece, is only a small part or one part of it. But to peg it, I think, at the moral level is to implicitly and subtly critique Israeli morality as being dirtied by the reality that we live in. And I completely reject that idea.
Let's talk for a second, Daniel, about how Israelis view the American. For the first time, I see more and more articles in the Israeli press or in the media about what is going on there in the American Jewish world. Usually you get in the Yediot Ahronon, the main Israeli newspaper, notes, stuff about American Jewry in page 67 or something like that. No more than that. And suddenly the story is there. What is going on in the universities, the mood there, anti-Semitism, how the young Israelis that you meet see the other side, what is going on in America. Politics, the criticism upon Israel, universities, the leadership, lack of leadership in the American Jewish community. What is going on in their mind about the other side, America?
Well, you probably remember as well as I do that when the whole interviewing of the three university presidents of Harvard, Penn, I think it was MIT. by Elise Stefanik, who's herself a Harvard graduate. So the great irony is, of course, that she was grilling the president of the university of which she was a graduate. Yediot Achronot that next weekend had on the front page the word contextual. Like, what does that even mean? Because they knew that Israelis were seeing clips of this, but they knew that Israelis, what does that mean? It's contextual. So they had to do a whole thing. I think that was really a turning point. I think that when Israelis saw that the institutions that had been the gateway to American Jewish success, and that's what the universities in America, the great universities were. Columbia, Harvard, Penn, Yale, MIT. If your parents grew up, let's say on the Lower East Side, and then their children went to City College in New York, their children went to Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Columbia, et cetera, and they made it. Those were the institutions that were the gateway. And when the presidents of those institutions could not say to Elise Stefanik that calling for the mass, killing of whatever is anti-Semitism, I think Israelis, as you say, Yard lehem ha'asimon, the little token went down in the phone. We don't have asimonim anymore. We don't have real phones anymore. I'm always, by the way, curious, why does new software, when it has a thing make a call, it has an old-fashioned phone receiver that nobody who uses the software has ever seen a receiver like that. But in any event, that's somebody else's problem. I think Israelis all of a sudden got it, that something really terrible is happening all over the world. To be sure, there was a horrible thing in Athens yesterday at this Israeli kosher restaurant that just opened, and a few hours later, it was a terrible situation there. My neighborhood in Baka here in Jerusalem, we were just talking at Shabbat with some friends over lunch on Shabbat, how much more French we hear in the neighborhood. French are fleeing Paris and coming here. It's very good for the bakeries in the neighborhood, but it's a sad comment on what's happening in Europe. And I think Israelis are very sad, actually. There's none of this, oh, we told you so. There's none of this, oh, you didn't listen to the early Zionists. There's none of that. I have heard absolutely, positively none of that. In the same way, by the way, that you never heard any religious Israeli say about the Nova, well, if those kids hadn't gone to a party on Shabbat, they'd be alive. Nobody said that. Zero. Absolutely nobody in this country said that, including, by the way, people who are in religious communities whose friends' kids were killed. I mean, there was somebody in our show. I go to what you call an egalitarian Orthodox community. We can have a large conversation about whether that's an oxymoron, but I don't think it is. It's an Orthodox community, but it's totally egalitarian. We lost somebody tragically from our community at the Nova. It's just a tragedy, period. End of discussion. Nothing more, nothing less to say. And I think Israelis look at what's happening in America the same way. It's horrifying. So I don't see any one-upmanship. I don't see any gloating. And I think that among our students, there is a genuine desire to try to understand what were the seeds buried deep in American society that have now begun to sprout. Now, they don't know that there has always been anti-Semitism in America, right? There was Lindbergh and there was Father Coughlin and there was the KKK and there was General Grant's order, expelling the Jews from certain parts of the United States.
Henry Ford, and the list is
right. Henry Ford. I mean, there's been no shortage of anti-Semites in America, including, back at the very, very, very beginning when they didn't want to actually accept the Jews into New Amsterdam. But our students are really very sophisticated. This is the equivalent of an Ivy League undergraduate college. So they're not asking, who are the good Congress people, who are the bad. They're not interested in that. They really want to try to understand what are the roots of this. Now, some of the roots are Christian. Right? I mean, Christianity has a long, storied relationship with the Jews, and it's overwhelmingly not a pretty relationship, even in recent years. And some of it, of course, is rabid universalism, because universalism, which denies really the legitimacy of distinctiveness and of peoples, calls the whole nation state into question. And when you add to universalism, you add a power structure in which the weak are almost always, by definition, the just. And when the darker skinned are almost always, by definition, the just, even though, by the way, Israelis are 60% Mizrahi, and therefore just as darker skinned as the Gazans. But leave that aside. So our students are really trying to understand much more what's really happening in the world. Why is this hatred that we naively thought we had more or less put to bed in the middle of the 20th century? And it had, it lived on a little bit longer in the Soviet Union, which then fell, and it lived on here. But we really thought 20, 30 years ago, I think you and I would have both said, we're living in an era in which the travesty and the horror of anti-Semitism, we're too smart to think it's gone away. We know too much history, but it really looks much better than it did, and it doesn't look much better than it did anymore. And our students really want to try to understand the larger sociological, ideological core of it, not the specific incident here or the specific congresswoman there. They're interested in Western civilization and what it's all about.
Daniel, while we are talking, there's a huge debate at the Knesset and the government right now about the Attorney General. We started the whole journey 3 years ago with the new story that the government introduced to the Israeli community, to the Israeli public. Let's talk a little bit about the division within the Israeli society. How do you see that? And what is the challenge of the Israeli society from a spiritual point of view, from within the community? Let's leave aside Gaza and Iran. Let's talk about us, the Jewish community in Israel, the Israeli society, not just the Jewish, the Israeli society. How do you see that? And how can we sell that? This is the second part of the question to the American Jewish community. How we can sell, well, no pluralism, less democracy, or how do you tell to our friends from overseas about what is going on here right now?
Well, I'm uninterested in selling Israel to anybody. I really am. I'm not interested in it. Israel is what it is, and people are going to make their own choices. I know that that's probably a short-sighted perspective, but I found these conversations with trying to convince people that I just found it not particularly productive. But before we get to that, right before I got on with you, right before I was looking at my phone, I don't know if you saw it yet. The Supreme Court ruled today that the Israeli rabbinate has to open up the exams to become a rabbi to women as well. Now, that is not going to happen anytime in the near future, but that's part of Israel too. In other words, the Supreme Court ruling, I haven't looked to see who ruled on which, I don't know who wrote the opinion. I haven't seen it yet. But in other words, that's part of the story here too. Nobody last week would have imagined that we'd be having a conversation about women in the Orthodox rabbinate. But the Supreme Court said, you're now going to have that conversation. Look, I think the challenge for all of us in a very complex world is to be able to embrace complexity. And I think that modern people, not Israelis, not Americans, just modern people are terrible at embracing complexity. So, for example, the
Israelis see the world from black and white perspective.
Listen, you're either pro-judicial reform or you're anti-judicial reform. But the reality is that we need some judicial reform in Israel. Some of the ideas of judicial reform are actually correct. And some of the ideas were pushed too far. And the main sin, so to speak, of the Netanyahu government is not that it tried to advance judicial reform. The two sins are, number one, that Bibi said in his campaign that was not an agenda. And immediately at the beginning of January 23, Yariv Levin said that, of course, it was. He had lied to the populace. It's not the first time a politician lied, and it's not the last time that Bibi Netanyahu lied. But that was the first sin. And the other sin was, whether judicial reform was entirely legitimate or not, it was clearly dividing the country in a way that was so existentially dangerous and that may have brought on or helped to bring on October 7th, that genuine leadership on Bibi's part would have meant saying, guys, we got to pull back here. It may be right, but this is destroying the country. But I think here, in other words, why was I now at the Nova? Why was I at the Nova this morning? Because I woke up one bright morning and said to my wife, let's go get depressed. No, I was in the Nova because I was in the Negev interviewing a Jewish principal of a Bedouin high school. A high school called Kochvei Hamidbar, the Stars of the Desert, which was founded by Jews and it's funded by American Jews, all to take young Bedouins and to give them fluent Hebrew and to enable them to take the Bagrut, like the ACT or SAT exam, to go to university. That's also pluralism. And when the Supreme Court rules that women have to be allowed to take the rabbinate exams, it's not going to happen today or tomorrow or next year. It doesn't matter. That's also pluralism. And when you see people coming back from Gaza, with religious and secular, saying we're not going back to the discourse of what we call October 6th. We're getting beyond that. And we want to somehow build bridges to each other. I posted on my blog today on Israel from the Inside a beautiful piece by Chagai Luber, who wrote a thing about just Israelis embracing each other. There's much more pluralism here than we imagine. Now, you can always point to the examples of a lack of pluralism. You can point to the ways in which Reform and conservative Judaism are not given their due. You can point to the ways. Here's a major challenge to Israel, that Orthodox religious education in Israel has not really figured out how to produce deeply pluralistic, not radicalized religion. And non-Orthodox religious education in Israel has not figured out how to create deeply passionate, ongoing religious education so that the lives of those people are Jewish. Every 2 hours, you peek in on them, you'd see something Jewish happening. So we're struggling. We're struggling in Israel for a whole array of reasons. In the same way, by the way, America is struggling with creating a middle also. I mean, if you're a moderate Republican or a traditional Democrat, it's a lonely time to be an American, and it's a very lonely time to be an American Jew. This is not just an Israeli problem. You see it in America. The moderate Protestant church is evaporating in front of your eyes. The evangelical church is growing dramatically, but fewer and fewer people are going to evangelical churches. It's a fascinating thing. The
Mhm.
numbers of Americans who identify themselves as evangelicals is going very high. The numbers of people who show up in church is actually declining. Why? Because the evangelical church is becoming a political party. It's not even a religious thing anymore. And we see some of that here. There's parts of Israeli religiosity that have become political. I would throw Ben Gvir and Smotrich into that. There's nothing spiritual about Ben Gvir. I haven't heard him say a word of Torah in my entire life. But so I just want to make it clear that this is not just Israel's problem. And so when I want to try to sell Israel to other people, so we start with George Floyd. Should we start with guns in public schools? Should we start where do we start? Every society has its deep, profound, heartbreaking flaws. We have ours too. But I think this idea of trying to sell Israel to somebody puts us at a kind of a defensive posture. I think that what's happened here is with all of its many flaws, and believe me, I just write about them virtually every single day, and you and I agree about 90% of them. With all of its flaws, there is a blossoming of Jewish knowledge. There are more people studying Torah in Israel than there were in Europe before the war,
No
period.
doubt. Yeah.
Right? And many of them in very good places like Yeshivat Har Etzion and at Hadar and so on and so forth. In my neighborhood here in Baca, there are a number of what you would call egalitarian Orthodox communities where women have every single bit as much of a role as men do, even though they're observant communities that follow the liturgy traditionally and all of that. You have Tamara Led Applebaum, who runs a very traditional, I wouldn't call it Orthodox, but a very traditional community called Sion, which packs the house. These are communities that prior to the war were doing things with Palestinian villages in the area. These are communities, including religious communities, that prior to the war were studying Arabic because they wanted to be able to, and I think that will come back. Nobody wants to study Arabic right now. It's understandable. And nobody wants to go to Palestinian villages and do, trading of, bringing clothes for orphans and stuff. It's a very sad time here. A lot of important things have broken down. So look, I'm very worried about the Israeli rabbinate. I'm very, very worried about it. And I wish that we had figured out a way in Israel, and we haven't yet, but I don't think we can give up on it, to produce a kind of a passionate, moderate religiosity. The right has the passion, the left has the moderate, but nobody has the passionate moderation. And that's a challenge for Jews everywhere in the world. So Rabbi Azari, I agree with you with many of the shortcomings about, pluralism. They're very real. They break my heart. They make me sick sometimes. Um, but I think there's a tremendous amount that's happened here that is simply unbelievable. When you see religious and secular and Muslim justices on the Supreme Court write opinions together, that's no small thing. That there's a debate over whether Ayman Odeh should be thrown out of the Knesset. I actually am very conflicted about it. I think what he said was horrible, but I don't love the optics of throwing an Arab out of the Knesset. But I could see the argument for doing it, by the way. It's not obvious that it's the wrong thing to do, but you're having a conversation, and it's not obvious that you are going to throw him out. I mean, here is a Jewish state in which an Arab MK said some pretty horrible things, and there's a debate over whether or not he should be thrown out. It's not a done deal, and as of today, it looks like they don't have the votes to get rid of him. That's not a small thing. And so, we could do a litany of things that I think need to be fixed and repaired about this place. But I'm very proud of it with all of the heartbreaking nature of it. I'm very proud of it. And so when one says, how do you sell it? What I want to not sell, but show is the most vibrant Jewish community in the world, period. of all different sorts. The secular kibbutzim in the Gaza envelope are among the most vibrant Jewish communities in the world. You go to Yeshivat Har Etzion, it's among the most vibrant Jewish communities in the world. Go to Rabbi Tamar Elad Applebaum's Tzion here, go to a religious kibbutz in the Galilee. These are all unbelievably, powerfully committed and vibrant Jewish communities, none of which have been replicated anywhere else in the world, not Australia, not Europe, not America, not South America. That's what I would like to spend my time talking about, not so unquote selling it because I have some sort of damaged product that I still want somebody to buy.
Yeah, I agree with you, Daniel. And last, question that I will ask, and then about 2 to 3 questions from the audience that I see that is writing. A minute about Reform Judaism, conservative Judaism in Israel. Your prediction. I mean, you are, as a modern Orthodox, seeing the world in Israel, understand what is going on there and here.
But I'm a conservative rabbi, and I was ordained by JTS, so I'm a conservative rabbi.
But you identify yourself as a modern Orthodox conservative. I mean,
I go to an Orthodox shul. That's because it's 300 yards from my house. What is your
feeling about our movement, Reform Judaism in Israel, conservative Judaism, the failure, the success, the option? Any prediction about the future of those movements in Israel?
Yeah.
We talk about that in your podcast, but let's move from that perspective to...
Well, I'll say something that I didn't say, I think, when you and I were talking, if I remember correctly. Movements are a very American phenomenon. They're not really an Israeli phenomenon. They're not a traditional Jewish phenomenon. You had, Mitnagdim and Hasidim in Europe, it's true. But the whole movement thing is a very non-Israeli thing. I'll tell you where I think the future of Judaism for the non-Orthodox community lies. It doesn't lie in Reform Judaism, and it doesn't lie in conservative Judaism. It lies in the model, not the actual, but the model of what the Mizrahi Sephardi population has brought to Israel, which is a model of reverence. There's a professor, I think it's Buzaglo, if I'm not mistaken, but I wouldn't swear to that, who wrote a book about Mizrahim and Ashkenazim in Israel, and he made a fascinating point, and he said, what animates the Orthodox Ashkenazi world is obedience. In other words, I'm observant, I follow halacha, I have to follow the laws. But we all know that in the Mizrahi world, you go to shul Friday night, and then Shabbat morning you drive to the beach. Because there, he said, it's not about obedience, it's about reverence. And I think the challenge of all of us, and here I'll include myself, who are theologically non-Orthodox, and here I 100% include myself, I think our challenge is to create liberal communities that have a sense of deep reverence. And we have not been all that successful at it. We have not been that successful at it in the United States. And we've not been successful at it in Israel. Now, deep reverence, obviously a whole other conversation, but I'll just say 2 or 3 quick things. Deep reverence, I think, in the Jewish world is made manifest, first of all, by certain things that are not negotiable. Not negotiable. So I may go to the beach on Shabbat morning, but going to shul Friday night is simply not negotiable. And that's how it is in that community. Deep reverence is characterized, I think, by a sense that my life has to be infused day by day, morning, afternoon, and evening with Jewish elements. I may not do every single thing that halakha tells me to do, and I may not daven mincha every day, and I may do things that an Orthodox rabbi would not approve of on Shabbat, these people will say. But there are certain things that are not negotiable. You will not find very many Mizrahi families that don't have a kosher home. What level of kosher? A conversation. But the number of Mizrahi families that just have an out-and-out non-kosher home is just very small because they have a sense that the non-negotiability of certain standards in the home is partly what brings and infuses the ether in the home with a sense of reverence and peoplehood and belonging. And so therefore, I think that the challenge is what Reform and conservative Judaism, I think, are bringing to Israel that is critically important is showing that there are, as we used to say on those bumper stickers, Yesh yoter miderech achat liyot Yehudi. There's more than one way to be a Jew, and that is 1,000% true. And I think that tremendous credit goes to people like you and the institutions that you've created and nurtured for modeling that to Jews all around Israel. At the end of the day, though, I think 50 years from now, the story is not going to be reform and it's not going to be conservative. It's going to be reverent or not reverent. It's going to be infused with Jewish action and belonging and the smell of Jewish life in the air on a day-to-day basis or not infused? And I think, just to wrap up here, I think that we're going to see a renewal of interest in exploring that question as a result of the horrors of October 7th. What October 7th has reminded Israelis is that our survival is by no means a given. If we want to stay alive here, we're going to have to continue to fight to stay alive here, and we're going to have to continue to die to stay alive here. And if we're going to have to continue to die, the question you have to ask yourself is not what am I willing to die for, but what do I want to live for? And I believe that we're going to see a kind of a new, robust conversation among non-Orthodox Jews, among secular Jews, Reform Jews, conservative Jews, if you want to use that terminology. We're going to see a new, robust conversation asking, what does it take to make Jewish life sufficiently meaningful and engaging that it goes without saying that this is who I am? And I think that's a very healthy conversation. It's tragic, I think, that it took the horrors of the last 20 months or so to bring that to the fore. But I do believe that, in fact, that some of that is going to emerge. And I think here the leadership of the reform movement and the conservative movement and many others are some of the many voices who I think are going to contribute to the richness of that conversation.
Thank you, Daniel. Guys, questions. Edith, can you run over the questions that were raised? And by the way, Daniel, we see a dramatic change since October 7th. I see that in weddings, numbers of bar mitzvot, conversion dramatically went up. The numbers of converts coming to us, mainly from former Soviet Union, that came to Israel because the grandfather was Jewish and never bothered to deal with the question to convert. But since the war started, I'm talking about the last 2 years, we see a dramatic growth in the numbers of people approaching and looking for when I want to be Jewish. I felt that I need to do that. You hear that again and again. It's fascinating. It's you're right. Edith, please.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And as you can see, we have a lot of comments back and forth, a lot of questions. One of the questions that we've seen a few times is about, let me get to I copy pasted it, is how do can non-Jews or anyone for that matter be legitimately both against the existence of Israel and not anti-Semitic? I fear that, this is from Lisa Austin, by the way, I fear that until we can somehow re-educate the left that Israel did not steal Israel from Palestinians and is not actually apartheid or colonialist or an occupier committing an actual genocide, we will not be able to get them to see Israel as anything other than the little Satan. Have you any ideas on how to change this oppressed versus oppressor model? And also somebody that falls in line with what you mentioned about birthright and how the soldiers are on the birthright trips. How do you feel about bringing more Israeli soldiers over to the United States, since more of the majority of young Jewish Americans are there?
Yeah. First of all, do you have I haven't been following the chat. I'm terrible at multitasking. Do you have the capacity to take them all and put them into some sort of Word document? Do you have that? Is that?
Yeah, I can try to do as much as I can while we're talking.
Okay, I don't know, but there's no way to just download. I don't know if it's a
yeah.
And because if there is, what I would say to to people that are here with us, that I would try to address. We can't address all of them now tonight, but I would try to get to them down the road in Israel from the inside in some ways, either in video or audio form, or write up some of it, because I would love to see all those questions, which I have not been able to follow.
Sure.
Look, here's what I love about the phrase "from the river to the sea." I don't go about chanting it. Don't get me wrong, but "from the river to the sea" is a great phrase because it makes it clear this is not about occupation. This is about Israel's existence at all. So when those Columbia and Harvard students are chanting "from the river to the sea," first of all, by the way, they have no idea what river they're talking about, even though they go to an Ivy League college. They have just no idea. But this is really, people don't really know, for example, the history. Who lives in Gaza? Where'd they come from? Have they been living in Gaza for hundreds of years? When I went to that Bedouin school today, the principal told me something fascinating. He said that this school is almost a decade old and it's got hundreds of Bedouin kids and the parents are thrilled. But most of those parents have actual family in Gaza, because a lot of people who are in Gaza are people who fled the fighting in 48 and went there. Some went to the West Bank, some went to Gaza, some stayed in Israel and are now Israeli citizens and doctors and pharmacists and whatever else. But people went to Gaza. They've been there for less than 2 generations. That's not about their legitimacy. It's about saying these Bedouin kids in that high school have family in Gaza. like aunts and uncles. And so the principle was saying to me, when my whole Israeli staff got called up and went to war and then came back, we came back to a population of students who saw us as people who'd gone to war against their families. I mean, this is unbelievably complicated stuff. But you ask most of those kids on college campuses in America, the Gazans, how long have they been there and where did they come from? They can't begin to tell you. I think that look, there's a lot of things that Israel does that are wrong, and that break my heart and whatever. Do we have this conversation about Korea? Do we have this conversation about the United States? Do we have this conversation about Russia? Do we have this conversation about any other country in the world? When we're having similar conversations about other countries, two-thirds of which are younger than Israel. Israel is one of the oldest countries in the world, by the way, right? Because it's number 66 or 65 in the United Nations, and there's 180 something countries in the UN. Two-thirds of the world's countries were created after 1948. Is there any other country on the planet about which people are having this conversation? No, there isn't. And that's why the conversation about whether or not Israel should exist is, first of all, not a political, moral, demographic, territorial, national conversation. It's about Jews. The second thing is this. The world, I'm not a huge fan of the UN for obvious reasons, but the UN made a decision in 1947. And it basically said, if you look at world history, not just the middle of the 20th century, but you look at the history of the world, there's only one people that has been assailed time and time and time again. I was talking to somebody today, not that rabbi friend of mine, somebody else, about his trip to Iceland recently. And I said, yeah, my wife and I, it's high on our bucket list. And he said, yeah, just be careful, by the way, how you identify yourself there. It's a very anti-Semitic country. And I said, no, you mean anti-Israel? He goes, no, it's anti-Semitic. I said, how many Jews are there in Iceland? He goes, there are no Jews in Iceland. But it's apparently a very anti-Semitic country. Japan, as you know, has a huge anti-Semitism problem. The protocols of the Elders of Zion sell, in heaps in Japan. So whether this is about the world coming to terms with the fact that for a whole array of reasons, there is one people in the history of the planet that has been assailed by Christianity and by Islam, by capitalists and by communists, by people in the ancient world, the Greeks and the Romans and the Persians, by people in the Middle Ages with the Church, the Vatican, etc., by people in early modernity and people in modern modernity. We have a right to be. And we are a people, look at New York, look at Paris, look at Berlin, look at Japan, look at Iceland. We are a people that no matter where we are, the anti-Semitism comes up from the ground. There's only one place where we can guarantee our children and our grandchildren that they're going to walk down the street. They'll encounter danger, but they won't encounter anti-Semitism. And that's a Jewish state. And so therefore, for me, to argue that Israel's policies should be different is totally legitimate. Criticize virtually anything you want about Israel. Argue that the national anthem should not be about Jews because there's Arab citizens, some of whom go off to the army and fight. A good conversation to have. I agree, by the way. I don't think we should change the Hebrew one. We should have another anthem in Arabic, I think. There's lots of profound conversations to have. But the minute that you say that the one people that has been assailed in the ancient world, the medieval world, the early modern world, and the modern world by all those different sorts of people shouldn't have the right to determine its own destiny, then I think what you're talking about is not opposition to the state. You're talking about opposition to the survival of this people. And yeah, that's good old-fashioned USDA choice, anti-Semitism.
Right.
What was the other part of that question? I forget. It was about how to change the... Yeah.
Right, the switching.
Just to say, the question of how to do the opposite of birthright, in other words, bring Israelis to America, is a fascinating question. And I don't want to go into it now, but a number of organizations have tried it, some with some degree of success. It's very, very, very hard. Partly because America is so fascinating and people want to do this and do that and, go to Niagara Falls and go to Disneyland and whatever. As I say that not dismissively, it's great things to see. It's also so huge. I mean, if you've seen New York's Jewish community, you have not seen the Bay Area's Jewish community. And if you've seen a small community in the south of, Louisiana or Alabama, that is a very different kind of community from a small Jewish community in New England. And therefore, to really show them American life, it's just very expensive and very time-consuming and a lot of travel. So there has been discussion of it. I think it's a very, very, very worthy idea. And by the way, this I will say, when you see people that go to America for a long time, like for a year, let's say with the Wexner program in Boston, I have lost count of the number of Israelis who tell me the first time I went into a synagogue was in Boston, and it was a Reform synagogue. It was Temple Beth Elohim. I hear that constantly because it's got a nice relationship with Harvard's campus. And they say, and I discovered a kind of Judaism that I never knew could exist. And I don't do that in Israel. I may go to a different synagogue, but Beth Elohim, this gorgeous, unbelievably spectacular sanctuary outside of Boston, taught me, they say, that there's a different kind of Judaism than the Judaism that I was raised on, and it made me curious to discover this tradition anew. So I think Israeli Jews have a tremendous amount to get out of being in touch with American Judaism in a very deep way.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure that a trip with lots of soldiers is necessarily the way to do it, but how to do it, there's much better experts than I.
By the way, Daniel, there is a program that the Jewish Agency endorses and send every year hundreds of shlichim, emissaries, to the summer camps.
Right.
Many Israelis discovered their Judaism, discovered that they are Jewish through the summer camps. I hear again and again from people coming to Beit Daniel to get married through a reform ceremony. I found my Judaism in the summer camp as a senior advisor or a teacher of folk dance or a musician that are amazing as Bet Elohim or the synagogues around the United States that they meet through bar mitzvah, wedding of the family. It's amazing. I mean, there are hundreds of Israelis that goes every year to different programs, to different summer camps and synagogues. It's done by the Jewish Agency.
Yeah, that's true. But I'll just explain, as you know very well, it's a complex story. So we have a student who graduated Shalem recently. She was a shlicha at a Camp Ramah, I won't say which Camp Ramah, but at a Camp Ramah a number of years ago, long before the war, was during a different one of the Gaza kerfuffles that we unfortunately and tragically have every few years. Her then fiance, now husband and the father of her children, but then her fiance was in Gaza. And she had been assigned to be a shlicha by the Jewish Agency to go to this camp, and she felt very, very conflicted about leaving him. He was in Gaza. She decided, though she'd made a commitment, she would go. When Shabbat came, she went to the person who was the division head, the Rosh Edah, and she said, "Can we say a prayer for Chayalei Tzahal, for the Israeli soldiers?"
And she heard no.
She was told no. And she said, "Well, why not?" And they would say, "Well, because Palestinians are dying too." And she came home from that experience saying, "I have much less in common with that Jewish community than I thought that I had." So again, everything in life is complicated. Everything cuts both ways. You can go to America and discover your Judaism anew, and you can go to America and see the depth and the breadth of the divide that separates us, and it depends on circumstance. And by the way, I still think it's good that she went there because she's smarter about a lot of things. She also saw many wonderful things at Camp Ramah, obviously, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kids and staff doing amazing things. Somebody's sending me tonight a video. They told me about it, though. All the Israelis were late to Camp Ramah this year. My granddaughter is actually at Camp Ramah in New England this year. She was late. She's 10 years old. She had to fly by herself. It's a whole to-do. 50 Israeli staff were late getting to Camp Ramah in Nyack, and a bunch of Israelis were late getting to the Berkshires. And somebody told me just yesterday that there's a video of the Israelis being welcomed to the Berkshires in a way that she said is just, you can't watch the video and not cry. And so it's like everything in life. Is marriage great? Yes. And does marriage drive you nuts? Yes. Are you glad to have children? Yes. Do you sometimes wonder why you had children? Yes. Is it wonderful to be Israeli? Yes. Is it great to pay 50% income tax? No. It's just, life is a complicated enterprise. And I think that regardless of whether we're talking about Israeli pluralism or Israeli religiosity or Israeli politics or whatever, I think our challenge, no matter where we see ourselves on the political spectrum or the religious spectrum or anything else, is to try to embrace complexity. We as a modern human race have become terrible at embracing complexity. And I would say this, the minute that I am sure that I am right about any issue whatsoever, all I know is that I haven't read enough about it. And the people that I most appreciate talking to are the people who convince me that maybe I was wrong. I don't need to be in the echo chamber. I can find people all day long to tell me I'm right. Not anybody in my family, but that's another problem altogether. But I can find people all day long, but that's not interesting. I don't want somebody to say, "Oh yeah, that's such a great point." I want somebody to say, "Yeah, but think about this." And that, by the way, Rabbi Azari, going back to what you said before, that's the very essence of studying Talmud. I mean, the Talmud is a 2,700-page argument. And every single page of Talmud
and disagreements in a way that sometimes
led. Every rabbi gets asked is not, "Why do you disagree with that rabbi?" but "What do you think is strong about that other position that your position now has to account for? And I think that's a model of discourse that we as Jews should should recapture. We should study Talmud not because we need to know necessarily how to bring this sacrifice or that sacrifice, although much of the Talmud's not about that. I mean, we're studying Avodah Zarah now in Daf Yomi, which is about Jewish relationship to the non-Jewish world. If there was ever a period in which that tractate is relevant, it's now. But I think the
Yeah.
Talmudic idea is somebody says something that opposes my view. What the Talmud wants me to do is not say why they're wrong, but say what's the strongest part of their argument that challenges my argument. If we could internalize that, Israelis, American Jews, European Jews, religious, non-religious, Orthodox, conservative, Reform, we would all be much better and richer for the experience, I think.
Can be
Well,
better than that to close this conversation. The concept of Hillel and his house that I hope will win again in Israel, in American Jewish world, in our world in this point. Daniel, thank you very much for being
Thank you very
here.
much. What an honor and a privilege it is to be in dialogue. And I hope that we can get to some of the other questions that I apologize we couldn't get to.
No, we'll send
But
the
Edith will send them
questions
to me,
and
and I'll try
yeah.
to figure out a way
And
to
I would
address
like
them.
to endorse our friends of Bay Daniel, to listen more to Daniel, to get to his podcast, to get his emails from Israel. His point of view is very interesting. The concept that he presents is really listen to him. And those who join us for the first time get to know Bay Daniel and the work that we do. We try to bring that spirit to Israelis. Most of them come from the secular perspective, the secular world. They actually meet the words of Kaddish or Aleinu Leshabeach or in the first time when they enter to Bay Daniel. And we need that. We need that concept of a Jewish spirit in our world, in Israel. Don't leave Judaism to Ben Gvir and Smotrich and to the Haredim. We need a different Jewish perspective, and organizations like our organization is there in order to introduce that to the secular Israeli community. So, Edith, there is a
yeah, no,
voice that we would like to hear from our friend
yeah,
Ira Wagner
yeah.
that actually, I think, made the first connection between me and Daniel and Ira. If you are here, it's a great opportunity for us to say Mazel Tov to you and Kim for the wedding that is about to happen in few weeks time. So Mazel Tov, Ira.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you so much, Mayor, and thank you, Danny, for being with us today. And it's an honor for me to be able to say the prayer for the state of Israel. Protector, rock, and redeemer of Israel, bless the state of Israel, which marks the dawning of hope for our redemption. Shield it beneath the wings of your steadfast love and spread over it the shelter of your peace. May a spark of your spirit inspire the actions of its president, prime minister, officials, judges, and advisors, that they may follow the path of righteousness, liberty, and freedom. Strengthen the hands of those who build and protect our holy land and grant them salvation and life. Grant peace to this land and everlasting joy to its inhabitants. Be near to all the people of Israel throughout the lands of their dispersion. Plant within their hearts the love of Zion, and may those of our people who are so inspired come to Jerusalem, your city, which bears your name. Spread your spirit over all the inhabitants of our land. Uproot hatred, jealousy, and evil. Plant in our hearts love and peoplehood, peace and friendship, and speedily fulfill the vision of your prophet. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, neither will they learn more anymore. And let us say, Amen.
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 Ira, thank you. And again, Mazel Tov. Mazel Tov.
Thank you, Mayor.
Edith? Closing
Thank you.
remarks or anything?
Yes, so thank you for everyone. Thank you for the lively sidebar chat. We will definitely share the recording. We will share the chat. And really, we are thankful that you're here and present and open to hearing, just as Mayor and Daniel spoke about, and listening without dismissing. And that is really what we do also at the Daniel Centers, welcoming people who have questions, who want to learn, who don't even know what they want to learn yet or what they are thinking in the Jewish direction. So we're appreciative for all of our longtime allies and friends and supporters who are with us here today, our Daniel Center Friends of Board members. And we'll send, just like I said, soon, we'll send you the Zoom link, the recording, and the chat. And the skies are back open, and hopefully we can see you in Tel Aviv and in Israel.
And thank you for Mark.
Thank you. Thank you so much for
Mark,
everyone
toda
being
rabah.
here.
Thank you all very much. I really honored to be
Daniel,
here.
thank you very, very much.
My pleasure. Thank you, Rabbi
Guys, see
Azari.
you
Really a pleasure.
soon in Israel. Bye bye.
תודה רב
Take care,
דני,
everyone.
לילה
תודה
טוב.
רבה.
ערב טוב.